A game of Nemesis Lockdown is played over a series of consecutive rounds and ends when any of the in-game conditions are met. Each round is split into two consecutive phases, the player phase and the event phase. At the start of each player phase, all players first draw cards from their action deck until they have 5 cards. If at any time you are required to draw a card and your deck is empty, then shuffle the discard pile and continue drawing the necessary number of cards. After all players have drawn their action cards, the player with the first player token passes it to the player on their left. Anytime players are required to do anything, start with the player that currently has the first player token and then continue clockwise from there. Starting with the first player and going clockwise, each player performs 2 actions on their turn. Players will continue performing turns in order until all players have passed. They'll then go to the event phase. If a player cannot or chooses not to take 2 actions on their turn, they must pass. If they perform only 1 action instead of the required 2, their second action must be to pass. And once a player has passed, they cannot perform any action for the remainder of the phase. When a player passes, they may discard any number of cards from their hand to the discard pile. They then flip their player aid card to the pass side so that other players can easily see that they are done with the phase. Keep in mind that passing does count as taking an action. If the player ends their turn, and keep in mind it is at the end of their turn, not just the end of the round. If they end their turn in a room with a fire token, they gain a light wound. If a player passes in a room with a fire token and therefore ends their round in that room, they'll take the damage from the fire token, but then if play continues with other players and it comes all the way back around to this player, they've already passed and therefore will not have another turn, and so they are not taking additional damage from that fire token this round. The first step of the event phase is to launch CSS pods if the time token is currently above 1. In this case it is, so you'll flip the CSS token, you'll see all CSS pods will launch this turn. After launching CSS pods, move the time token 1 space on the time track. If doing so meant resolving the auto-destruction sequence or the alert procedure sequence, then do that at this time. We'll talk about both of those a little later in this video. And then check to see if a power threshold has been crossed. Power thresholds are either blue or red, and we'll talk about both of those a little later as well. In sections with power, remove all noise markers in the corridors not connected to the rooms with characters and not in the technical corridor space. So in this case, this one's technical corridor, this one's connected to a character's room, so this would be the only noise that would be removed. Next, if there is an intruder in the same room as a character, it would attack at this point. After that, any intruder in the same room as a fire token will take 1 damage as well. Next, the players will draw and resolve an event card. And the final step is the Intruder Bag Development step. After completing the Intruder Bag Development step of the event phase, that is the end of the round. Let's discuss resolving the event cards in detail. When players draw and resolve an event card, the first thing they check is the intruder movement. In this case, there are 2 symbols, adult and breeder, and then here we have a number indicating the corridor those intruders will travel. This intruder is a creeper, and so it's not referenced on this event card, but let's say this had been an adult instead. This adult is in combat, and so it also does not move. However, this adult is not in combat, and so it will move along corridor 2, as you see here, into this room. And then there are no breeders on the board right now, so that symbol doesn't cause anything to happen. Sometimes an event card will have 2 numbers on it, like this one. In that case, the intruder follows the first number first and the second number second. So in this case, this intruder would move along corridor 1 and then corridor 3 that leads into the technical corridors. Before we discuss the technical corridor movement of an intruder, let's say that this sentry had been in this room. And so when this Intruder moved along the first corridor. It now is in combat, and so the second number no longer has any effect on this intruder. However, if the intruder does move into the technical corridor, it is removed from the board. Its corresponding token is placed back into the intruder bag, and if it had any wounds, those are gone now. If the intruder tried to move through a corridor with a door, it would not move and instead would break the door down. And in this case, after first trying to go through corridor 1, it would then go through corridor 3 this way. After resolving intruder movement, resolve the effect of the event card found here. In this case, place a fire marker in the backup power supply and power generator. Then remove this event from the game and reshuffle the event stack, including the discard pile. Some events will have additional effects marked with this symbol that only take place in sections without power. These effects are done in addition to the normal effect, not instead of. After resolving an event like this, you would discard it to the discard pile. In the rare instance that you actually run out of cards in the event deck, shuffle the discard pile to form a new one. During the Intruder Bag Development step, draw a single intruder token from the intruder bag. If it is the larva token, discard it and replace it with an adult. If it is the creeper token, discard it and replace it with a breeder token. If it is an adult token, return this token to the bag, and then all players perform a noise roll. A character in combat does not make a noise roll. Also, these noise rolls must be made in order. If the breeder is pulled from the bag, resolve it the same way you did with the adult. If the queen is pulled from the bag and there is a player in the nest, discard the queen and then place her mini out on the board. That character now resolves an encounter against the queen. However, if the nest is undiscovered or if there is no character in the nest, instead return the queen's token to the bag and then add an egg to the nest. If the blank token is pulled from the bag, return it to the bag and then also add an adult token to the bag. If there are no more adult tokens available, then nothing happens. Now let's discuss the different actions a player can perform. There are 4 groups of actions in the game. Basic actions listed on the character board, actions from action cards, actions from item cards, and actions from room tiles. Each action displays an action point cost. Each action displays an action symbol, and the number in that action symbol indicates the number of cards that must be discarded to pay for that action. Remember, discarded cards are always placed face up in the discard pile. It's also important to note that this cost is in addition to discarding the card itself. Now, in the case of search, the cost is 0, so discarding search is all it takes to take that action. But if the survivor wanted to use this card for repairs, they would discard it and then have to discard one additional card to take the action. Also, even though contamination cards are added to the player's action deck, they can never be used to pay for the cost of an action. Also, if a player is playing an action and another player interrupts that action, causing the action to not be taken, they still must pay the cost anyway. Also, if the player were using a one-use item like this, they would have to pay the cost and they would still lose this item, discarding it back to its pile. And they would not get any of the benefit of this item thanks to the interruption card. Some actions and items specify when they can be used. If it has this symbol, then it can only be used in combat. And if it has this symbol, it can only be used when not in combat. However, if it is not marked with a symbol, then it may be used in or out of combat. Each character has access to the same set of basic actions. For one action cost, the player may move their character whether or not they are in combat. A character always moves to a neighboring room. If they move while in combat, they must escape that combat. If a door between rooms is closed, the player cannot move through that door and would have to move to a different room. When entering a room, always resolve the following steps. If this tile is unexplored, as you see here, you'll reveal the exploration token and the tile. The exploration token will tell you how many items are in this room. And so set the number of items to the arrow for that room. And then in this case, we find out that the room is malfunctioning. Now, since the character has entered an empty room, there's no characters or intruders in there, they must perform a noise roll. However, if the character had moved to a room with another character or an intruder, they do not make the noise roll. Careful movement, which has a cost of 2, may only take place out of combat. It works exactly like regular movement, but after the move, instead of performing a noise roll, player chooses which corridor will get a noise marker that's attached to the room that they just moved into. Keep in mind that if every corridor attached to a room already has a noise marker, then a player may not do a careful movement into that room since none of those corridors may take another noise marker. For a cost of 1, a player may pick up a heavy object. The heavy object must be in the room that they are currently in. Once they pick it up, it then must go in either their left or right hand. Remember, a heavy object is a corpse, a carcass, or an egg. It's also important to keep in mind that heavy objects are not the same as heavy items, which are marked with this symbol. For 1 cost, a player may start a trade with all characters in the same room. Players may, with consent, reveal and exchange with each other player any item cards and objects they want to trade. Even though several players may take part in the trade with or without the active player, the only player that performs the action is the one who started it and therefore is the only one that actually pays the cost. Players can choose to give an item or object without asking for anything in return. However, characters may not exchange ammunition. For 1 cost, a player can craft an item. To do this, the player discards 2 cards with the appropriate blue symbols in the top left corner. In this case, we have a tool belt and some cables, and they craft the item that corresponds to the discarded symbols. In this case, this screwdriver and electricity symbol creates a taser. As you can see down here, they're the same symbols. It's important to realize that there is a limited number of craftable items, and if the craftable item is not available, then it cannot be crafted. For 1 cost, a character may shoot an intruder that they are in combat with by discarding 1 ammo from an energy or classic weapon in their hand. To shoot an intruder, they must be in combat with it, which means they must be in the same room as it. Players may also shoot uncarried eggs. For 1 cost, a player may melee attack an intruder that they are in combat with, which means, as we've said, it must be in the same room. And as you might expect, you can also melee attack an uncarried egg. For the listed cost, the player may play an action from their action cards. If there is an or option, then the players must choose one or the other option. Certain characters will even have cards that have 3 different available options. Some item cards allow a character to perform specific actions. Their description is provided in the item card as well as the cost. Most of the rooms allow a character to perform actions specific to that room. The computer action deck starts the game with 1 card revealed. Each character that is in a section with power and in a room with this computer symbol may use a computer action to perform one of the 3 listed actions on the card. After resolving this action, place this card at the bottom of the deck and reveal the next card. Whenever a lockdown card is revealed, resolve it immediately. If there is a malfunction marker in the room, then the computer action is not available. Moving around the facility is one of the basic activities for characters during the game. We've covered how to move during the basic action section of this video, but now let's look at some more concepts around the movement action. All rooms are tiles, with the exception of the alert room, the elevator rooms, and the stairwells. Rooms are connected by corridors. Neither characters nor intruders can ever stop in a corridor. They always will be in a room. Also, the effects of moving through any given corridor will always be resolved after the character is in the next room. Character actions may only be performed inside of a room. These 3 room tiles are considered special rooms, as are the elevator rooms, the emergency staircases, and the alert room. These are treated the same as normal rooms, with the only difference being they have no item counters, and you will not resolve an exploration token when entering them. The board is divided into 3 sections. You have section 1 here, above the fold line here. Then you have section 2 here, in the middle fold line. And then everything on this side of the fold line is section 3. Each section has its own power source. You'll also notice that each section is outlined in its own color. You have this sort of grayish blue here, yellow here for section 2, and reddish orange down here for section 3. There are also these emergency staircases, which are not considered to be in any section, though you'll see that their corridors are assigned sections. When the game mentions a section and an effect modifying power, treat the elevator power as a separate 4th section. There are 2 types of exploration tokens, underground and surface. Surface tokens are only used on the alternative Martian surface side of the board. When you flip an underground exploration token over, it will display a couple different pieces of information. The number indicates how many items will be in the room that's being explored. And then there will be a special effects symbol found here, in this case, a malfunction symbol. To resolve the exploration token, you flip it over, flip the room over, assign the indicated number of items to the room by aligning that number up with this arrow, and then resolve the special effect, in this case, placing a malfunction marker. If instead it had been this X, that would mean silence and nothing special happens. The player also will not perform a noise roll in this case. However, if the character currently has a slime marker on their character board, then instead they will have to resolve the danger effect, even if the character had moved by careful movement. The danger symbol means the character will not perform a noise roll. If there were an intruder in a neighboring room, that intruder would now move into the room the player has just explored. If there were multiple intruders in a neighboring room, they would all move into this room. The exception is if the intruder were in combat, it would not move. As usual, if the intruder tried to move through a closed door, it would destroy the door and then stay where it was. If there are no intruders in any neighboring rooms, or if they're in combat and so none of them are going to move, instead the player will place a noise marker in each corridor attached to the room. Any corridor that already had a noise marker would simply ignore this effect. And again, if the character had moved into this room using careful movement, they would still resolve danger as normal. If the special effect is the slime effect, then the player places a status marker on the slime spot on their character board. If the fire special effect is indicated, then the room is on fire. And if it's the door special effect, then a door closes behind the player in the corridor they just crossed through. So if they came from the defense control room, the door will be placed here. Once an exploration token is resolved, it is removed from the game. Now let's talk a little bit more about noise rolls. First and most importantly, and I believe this is an easy rule to forget because you do so frequently make noise rolls, if you move into a room that has another character or an intruder, you do not make a noise roll. However, anytime you move into a room that has no other character or intruder in it, you do make a noise roll. If you roll a 1, 2, 3, or 4, then you simply put a noise marker in the corridor indicated. In this case, 1 or 2 would be this corridor. If you roll a result that indicates a technical corridor entrance, then the noise marker is placed in the technical corridor. Any corridor may never have more than one noise marker. If you are ever instructed to place a noise marker in a corridor that already has one, you instead will resolve an encounter. So if a 2 or a 1 were rolled again, then this character is going to end up having an encounter. The danger result on this die is resolved exactly the same way as it is on the exploration token. So if there's an intruder in a neighboring room, it will move into this room as long as it's not already in combat. If there is no intruder moving into this room, then place a noise marker in every corridor attached to it. And silence is also resolved in the same way. Nothing happens unless the character has already been slimed, in which case they resolve silence as if it were danger. It's also important to realize that a noise marker in a corridor with a closed door still affects the entire corridor. Noise markers will never affect only a part of a corridor on one side of the door or the other. Also, as a reminder, once there is a noise marker in the technical corridor, every single technical corridor entrance will now trigger an encounter if another noise marker is added to them. Now let's discuss a few more notes about intruder movement. Intruders are going to move at different times during the game. Whenever a rule makes you move one or more of the intruders, it will explain in detail how to do it. If an intruder ends its movement on an unexplored room, leave the intruder on the room, but do not reveal the room or the exploration token. If you are ever instructed to place an adult intruder on the board, but all 8 are already out, they instead will all retreat. You then will remove all adult intruders that are not in combat from the board, placing the same number of adult tokens back into the intruder bag. And finally, you would place the adult intruder mini in the room where the encounter is occurring. Also remember, if an intruder ever enters the technical corridor, then it disappears from the board. Its token is returned to the bag, and any injuries it had are now discarded. Rooms between sections are emergency staircases. They are always considered to be in darkness and should be treated as blank rooms with no action. It is possible for them to contain a malfunction marker, but that has no effect other than lowering the total number of malfunction markers left. It's important to remember that these are not treated as being part of any particular section. So we've already talked a pretty good bit about fire, noise, and malfunctions. Just keep in mind that each corridor may only have a single noise marker, and each room may only have a single fire or malfunction marker. This universal marker is used for slime, which each player may only have a single slime. If they get slimed again, nothing additional happens. The same universal marker can also be used to show the player has sent the signal, and also to track light wounds and serious wounds. Now let's talk about doors a little bit more. Doors may only ever be placed in corridors, and each corridor may never have more than a single door token. As we've mentioned, doors have no effect on noise. A door may have one of 3 different statuses: open, closed, or destroyed. To mark that a door is open, there is simply no door token there. At the beginning of the game, all corridors have open doors. If there are no door tokens left in the pool, we need to place one. Take any non-destroyed door from the board and place it in the required corridor. If several intruders are moving from the same room through a door, this movement is considered simultaneous. They destroy the door and then stay in the starting room, all of them. A closed door is signified just by placing a door token in the corridor. This prevents both characters and intruders from moving through this corridor. Destroyed doors are marked with a lying door token like this. Movement is now allowed through this corridor, and a destroyed door may never be closed again. An encounter is any instance of an intruder appearing on the board in a room where a character is present after drawing an intruder token. Remember that the first encounter is a critical gameplay moment because the players have to choose one of their objectives and discard the other. An intruder moving from one room to another does not count as an encounter. To resolve an encounter, follow these steps. First, discard all noise markers from all corridors connected to this room. If this room had a technical corridor entrance as this one does, then it would also include discarding any noise markers in the technical corridor. Then, draw an intruder token from the intruder bag. Next, compare the number of cards currently in your hand with the appropriate number on the back of this token. Since the survivor is in a powered section, they'll look at the top number. As long as they have more than 0 cards in their hand, the intruder will not get a surprise attack. Place the appropriate intruder mini in the room. And then finally, put the drawn token aside. When drawing for an encounter, if the blank token is drawn, place a noise marker in each corridor connected to the room. Add an adult token to the intruder bag. Add an adult token to the intruder bag. If there are no adult tokens for some reason, then nothing happens. Return the blank token to the intruder bag. And then the encounter ends. Anytime a character moves into a room with an intruder, this is not considered an encounter, but they are immediately considered to be in combat. So let's talk about combat in more detail now. Remember that anytime during the game an intruder and a character are in the same room, they are always considered to be in combat. A character may attack an intruder in the same room using either the shoot action or the melee attack action. If a character has an energy or classic weapon with at least 1 ammo, they may perform the shoot action, as we've mentioned before. They discard 1 ammo. They then roll the red combat die. If they roll the blank side, it means they miss their target. If they roll this side and their target is a larva or creeper, they deal 1 injury to their target. In this case, they're targeting an adult, so they would actually miss their target. If they roll this side and their target is a larva, creeper, or adult, then they would deal 1 injury to the target. If not, then they miss. If they roll this side, then they deal 1 injury to their target regardless of type. And if they roll this side, then they deal 2 injuries to the target regardless of type. The advantage die is a special type of combat die. All effects that mention a combat die are applicable to the advantage die as well as the regular combat die. When shooting in a section with power, as we are here, the player must use the advantage die instead of the normal one. There are 2 new results in addition to the regular results on this die. This result means that the player may discard an action card to deal 1 injury to their target. And this result means the player deals 1 injury and then may discard an action card to deal 2 injuries instead. The advantage die will never be used during melee attacks. So now let's talk about melee attacks. If a character is in a room with an intruder, they may perform a basic melee attack action against that intruder. They must draw 1 contamination card and add it to their discard pile. Then they choose the intruder they're going to attack and they roll the red combat die. The results of the melee attack slightly differ from the shoot action. If they roll this, the attack misses and the character suffers 1 serious wound. If they roll this, they do deal 1 injury to their target if it's a larva or creeper, and if not, then they miss and their character suffers 1 serious wound. If their target is a larva, creeper, or adult and they roll this, then they deal 1 injury. If not, then they miss and they suffer 1 serious wound. This result deals 1 injury to their target regardless of type. And this result also deals only 1 injury to their target regardless of type. A character may try to escape from combat by performing a basic movement action to go to a neighboring room. The chosen room may be either explored or unexplored. After paying the cost to move, the character must first resolve an intruder attack against themselves. After paying the cost to move, but before moving the character, the player must resolve an intruder attack for each intruder in their room. If the character survives, they then end their movement in the chosen room. If it's a room without any other characters, then they must perform a noise roll as normal. And if it was an unexplored room, they would follow the normal exploration rules. If the character did not survive the attack, then they would die in the room the attack took place in. Anytime an intruder suffers injuries, use this dial to track the number of injuries and keep it near that intruder. Then, immediately after recording that injury, check the injury effect. If the injury is dealt to either an egg or a larva, one single injury is enough to kill either of them. If it was a creeper or an adult, then draw one attack card, but ignore everything except for this symbol in the top left corner. If the number is equal to or lower than the current number of injury markers, it is killed. In this case, 3. That's a 3. And so this adult is killed. Replace the adult intruder or the creeper intruder with an intruder carcass token. However, if this number is higher than the number of injuries, then the intruder is still alive. If a breeder or the queen takes an injury, then draw 2 attack cards, add both numbers together, and that's the number that the number of injuries must beat. If the breeder or queen is killed, you do also leave an intruder carcass token where they were. During the injury effect check, if there is a retreat icon, as you see here, then the intruder flees the combat. Draw an event card and resolve the movement as you see. The intruder symbols here are irrelevant for the purposes of retreat. In this case, the breeder would go through corridor 1 and then corridor 3. The injuries, of course, will go with it. An intruder will attack in 3 different cases: a surprise attack, the intruder attack step during the event phase, and during a character's escape attempt. Regardless of which case causes the attack, intruder attacks are always resolved the same way. First, the intruder chooses the character who is the target of the attack. It must be a character in the same room as the intruder. If there is more than one character in the room, intruders always attack the character who has the fewest action cards in their hand. In the event of a tie, the player who comes first in turn order is attacked. The player then draws and resolves one intruder attack card. If the card displays the intruder symbol matching the attacking intruder, resolve the effect on the card. In this case, it does not, and so the attack misses. However, if the queen had been out here, then this attack would have hit. Also, some intruder attack cards have a section indicated by this symbol that only resolves if the character is in the dark, which this one is not, and so that bottom section would be ignored in this case. Also keep in mind that during an intruder attack, this blood symbol has no effect. If the intruder is attacked by a larva, do not draw any intruder attack cards. Instead, remove the larva mini from the board and then place it on the character board. Finally, give the player 1 contamination card. As long as this larva is on the player's board, they are considered infested. If a character would get infested again, they die. So let's just touch on a few things regarding contamination cards. Anytime a character gets a contamination card, they always place it in the discard pile. These cards are a disadvantage for players because they are kept in hand like a normal action card, but they do not provide any additional actions and cannot be spent to pay the cost of other actions. However, they may still be discarded when passing. Each contamination card contains hidden information behind this red film, and that information decides whether or not the character who possesses the card is infected. Unless the character takes the time and makes the effort to scan the card, that information will remain unknown until the end of the game. There are several ways characters may try to get rid of contamination cards, including the rest action card, the decon room, the surgery room, and the antiseptic item. Each card or room description details the procedure to follow, but in most cases it's going to require a scan, which uses this device here. To scan, the player will place the card inside the scanner, and I don't believe this is going to show up on camera very well, and then see what it says. There are going to be several lines of text, mainly gibberish, but if infected, the word infected will appear in one of those lines, so read carefully. If you are infected, place a larva mini on your character board. If there is already one there, then your character dies. Anytime a rule asks you to remove a contamination card, you place it at the bottom of the contamination card deck. When your character dies due to infestation, not only do you place a character corpse in that room, but you also place a creeper in that room. Characters can suffer two types of wounds, light and serious. Light wounds are recorded using a universal tracker on this section of the character board. When a character suffers a light wound, if there isn't a status marker on their wound track, place one in the upper slot. Should the character take another light wound, move it down one space on the track. If the marker reaches the third position, discard the marker, and the character then suffers a serious wound. Light wounds are always dealt and resolved one at a time. When a character suffers a serious wound, draw one serious wound and place it face up near the character board. From now on, the player is affected by the effect described on the card. If a player has several copies of the same serious wound, the effects do not stack. However, it is more difficult to now get rid of the effect since the player will have to address both wounds. When a character with 3 serious wounds would suffer any additional wound, and that can be a light or serious wound, they are instantly killed. Remember that when a character dies, remove their mini from the board and place a character corpse token in that room. And also, if they had any heavy objects, that is left in the room where they died as well. But all other items are removed from the game. There are numerous ways to dress a serious wound. When a player does dress a serious wound, they flip the wound over, and as long as it stays face down, its effect is ignored, but it still counts towards their 3 serious wound limit. If a player is allowed to heal, they either remove a light wound, or they can discard a serious wound, depending on the specific effect. Certain knowledge levels give characters access to broader options from the action cards or items. Characters gain knowledge when performing the following actions. There are various ways to gain knowledge throughout the game, and those are detailed in the actions that provide you the knowledge. If a player needs to activate their knowledge token, this can be done in the archive, and in doing so, they also will gain 2 knowledge. This is the active side of the knowledge token, and this is the inactive side. Once the active side of the token is face up, that player may no longer use the archive room action again. Throughout the game, players will learn different weaknesses of the intruders. The game always starts with one weakness already discovered, and the possibility of discovering 2 more. To discover a weakness card, any character must research either a character corpse, intruder carcass, or egg in the lab room. They place the used object above the next weakness and then flip the weakness over. To research the final weakness, the object used must not be the one previously used, so in this case it would have to be either an intruder carcass or an egg. It's also important to realize that a character may not take advantage of these weaknesses until they've reached the appropriate knowledge level. So any character with knowledge level 3 can use the first one, knowledge level 5 for the second one, and knowledge level 8 for the third. When the game begins, sections 1 and 2 are powered as indicated by the blue side of these tokens, but the power is depleting rapidly. The quick depletion of power is represented by the red side of the time token. As we've mentioned, when a character is in a section without power, they are in darkness. Darkness effects may be found on event cards, Intruder Attack cards, Intruder tokens, etc. If an effect allows a player to ignore darkness, they may ignore any of the effects related to darkness. The most efficient way to restore power is the backup power supply found in Section 3. It won't hold for long, but it will slow the degradation of power. It brings power back to certain facility sections, and it allows the players to rearrange where these power tokens are. And most importantly, it flips the time token to the blue side, which means that when the time token passes these red thresholds, the power will no longer degrade. Anytime the red time token moves past a red threshold, the highest number that has power will lose power. When on the blue side, the threshold only activates when it is blue. So when this time token goes past this red one, nothing will happen. But later when it goes past this blue one, this one will power down again. Remember, it is always the highest active power token that flips to the inactive side. It's important to remember that all heavy items and heavy objects must be kept in a player's left or right hand, while normal items are kept in the player's inventory and are kept secret from other players. However, when any item card is used, it must be revealed from the inventory so other players can see. And there is no limit to the number of items that can be in a player's inventory. Every weapon has two numbers listed next to the ammo. The first number shows how much ammo that weapon starts with when the player acquires it, and the second number is the maximum capacity for that weapon's ammo. A weapon may never exceed its maximum capacity. A character may freely drop any item or object from their hands or inventory at any time during their turn without using an action. Objects will remain in the room where the player dropped it, while items are lost and are put back at the bottom of their deck. Finally, keep in mind that players may not ever directly attack each other, but they may cause harm to other characters as a side effect of their actions. For instance, trapping someone in a room on fire, activating the auto-destruction sequence with people still not evacuated, throwing a thermite charge at an intruder in a room with other characters are just a few of the many possibilities for ending the threat of other humans. You now know everything you need to know to play the standard game of Nemesis Lockdown. Be sure to come back for part 3 where we'll cover cooperative, solo, and the Martian surface side of the board. And eventually, we will film how to play with the Chytrid expansion as well. Thanks so much for watching. Be sure to come back for more videos. Got lots of great stuff coming up. Tales from the Loop, Anno 1800, Waste Nights, much more. And until next time for Bored Online, Bored Offline.